Get out of my wing, Nurse Donovan. I need a doctor who shows up, not a babysitter who hides in the supply closet. She said nothing. She picked up his chart and walked out. 6 days later, when the monitors screamed and the young doctor froze at the door, a name came out of her mouth that no personnel file at that hospital would ever explain. The room went dead silent. Chief Petty Officer Jacob Ryan stared at her like he had seen a ghost. In a way, he had. Nobody at that VA hospital knew what Claire Donovan used to be. In the next 6 minutes, they were all going to find out exactly what that ignorance had cost them. If you are listening from your car, your kitchen, or a night shift somewhere in the world, drop a comment and tell us where you're tuning in from. Hit like if Quiet Strength speaks to you. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories about ordinary people hiding extraordinary pasts. Welcome back to Emergency 911 Stories. Claire Donovan had learned how to be invisible. She kept her shoulders curved forward. She kept her eyes down. She let her hands shake a little when someone was watching, even though her hands had not actually shaken in 11 years. The trick to hiding was simple. Give people what they expected to see, and they stopped looking for anything else. At Ridgeline VA Polytrauma Rehabilitation Center, what people expected to see was a tired nurse in her mid-30s, competent enough, quiet to the point of strange, easy to overlook in a hallway full of louder personalities. Dr. Preston Hale was one of the louder personalities. He was 29 years old, 2 years out of his residency, and terrified of exactly one patient in the building. That patient was in room 214. "You're on Ryan again today," the charge nurse told Claire that morning, sliding the folder across the desk like it might bite her. Claire took it without comment. Inside the cover, someone had written a note in red pen. Difficult, combative, refuses most staff. She had read 100 files like this one. She had never read one that made her hands go cold the way this one did, and she did not let it show. Chief Petty Officer Jacob Ryan, callsign Ghost, United States Navy SEAL, medically retired, bilateral transfemoral amputation, incomplete spinal cord injury at T6, the result of a blast that had also taken most of his left hand. Claire knew that blast. She had been 11 meters away from it. She'd not told anyone that. She was not going to start today. When she pushed open the door to 214, Jacob Ryan was already glaring at her from the bed, his jaw tight. A physical therapy schedule crumpled on the floor where he had thrown it. "New nurse," he said. It was not a question. "How long before you quit, too?" "I don't quit," Claire said. Something in her voice made him look up sharper than the words should have earned. She noticed it. She filed it away and kept her face blank, the way she had been trained to do in rooms far more dangerous than this one. She checked his vitals with hands that moved fast and sure, faster than the shuffling, tentative movements she usually performed for an audience. He noticed that too. "You've done this before," he said. "I'm a nurse. This is my job." "That's not what I mean." Claire did not answer. She finished the blood pressure cuff, recorded the numbers, and left before he could ask again. Down the hall, an elderly veteran named Frank Delgado called out for her by name, and Claire spent 10 unhurried minutes adjusting his oxygen line and listening to a story about his granddaughter's wedding that she had already heard twice that week. It was a small kindness, the kind nobody would ever put in a performance review, and it cost her nothing but time she was willing to give. That was the part of the job Claire never had to fake. The disguise was in the posture, the lowered eyes, the deliberate slowness. The care underneath it had never been an act at all. Outside the door, Dr. Hale was waiting, arms crossed, clipboard held like a shield. "Is he stable?" "He's fine, doctor. His numbers are normal." "Good. Keep him that way. I have 12 other patients who actually want treatment." Hale had not been inside room 214 in 4 days. Claire knew this, because she had checked the log. She said nothing about that either. She understood men like Hale. Not from medicine. From every operation where someone with more rank than nerve had made a call from somewhere safe, while people on the ground paid for it. She had been the one on the ground once. She had sworn she would never again stand by while someone did that to a person who could not defend himself. But she also could not afford to be seen. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The tattoo on the inside of her left forearm, a string of coordinates no wider than a watch band, stayed hidden under her sleeve the way it always did. Nobody at Ridgeline had ever asked about it. Nobody had looked closely enough. That evening, She stood outside 214 again, listening through the door before she went in. An old habit from a life she was supposed to have left behind. Jacob was talking to himself. Not words, just breath, counting, the kind of breathing pattern combat medics taught to men learning to survive their own minds. She recognized the rhythm because she had taught men to breathe exactly that way, on a rooftop in Kandahar province, in a life she never spoke of out loud. She almost knocked. She almost walked in, and told him the truth right there, 6 days before either of them was ready for it. Instead, she wrote a note in his chart. Patient exhibiting anxiety behaviors, recommend monitoring, and went home to an apartment with bare walls and a locked box in the closet that held a folded flag and a set of dog tags that were not hers. The next 4 days were quiet. That was the problem with quiet, in Claire's experience. It never lasted, and it never warned you when it was about to end. On the 5th day, Jacob's blood pressure began climbing during a routine physical therapy session, and nobody noticed until it was almost too late to matter. Claire was 2 floors up when the first alert came through on her radio. Room 214, patient in distress. She was moving before she consciously decided to move, her body remembering a discipline her mind had tried to forget. By the time she reached the room, Dr. Hale was already there, and he was already wrong. Jacob's face was flushed dark red above the collarbone, and pale below it. A split coloring pattern Claire had seen exactly twice before in her career, both times in men with high spinal injuries. His forehead was soaked with sweat. His heart rate monitor read 140. His blood pressure read 204/118. "He's having a panic attack," Hale said, already reaching for a syringe of sedative. "Give him something to bring the heart rate down. We'll reassess in 20 minutes. "Don't," Claire said. It came out flat, immediate, with no shake in it at all. Hale turned, syringe still in hand. "Excuse me? That's not a panic attack. That's autonomic dysreflexia. If you sedate him right now, you could send him into a hemorrhagic stroke or a seizure inside the next 10 minutes. The room went very still. A physical therapist near the door stopped moving entirely. "I've been doing this for 6 years, Hale said, his voice climbing. Defensive in the specific way people get when a stranger challenges something they have built their identity around. "I think I know the difference between anxiety and a medical event. Thank you." "Then look at his face," Claire said. "Flushed above the injury line, pale below it. That's not something anxiety produces. That's a physiological split you only see with high spinal cord injuries, and it means his body is fighting a blood pressure spike it cannot regulate on its own. His injury is at T6. Above T6, the body can trigger a blood pressure spike this severe from something as small as a full bladder or a kinked catheter. It's a medical emergency, not a psychiatric one, and every minute we spend arguing about it is a minute closer to permanent brain injury." Jacob's eyes were open, wild, fixed on the ceiling. His jaw locked so tight a muscle jumped visibly along his cheek. "Check the catheter," Claire said, already moving to the bed, her hands finding the tubing with a speed that made the therapist near the door take a half-step backward. "It's kinked at the hip. That's your trigger source." She corrected it in seconds, her fingers precise, unhesitating. Nothing like the careful, timid movements she performed for cameras and co-workers on an ordinary day. "Sit him upright. Now. Not later now. We need gravity working against that pressure spike." 2 aides scrambled to raise the head of the bed. Jacob's breathing was ragged, his hands clenched into fists against the sheets. "Loosen anything binding around his abdomen and legs," Claire continued, her voice dropping into a register the room had never heard from her, flat and clipped and utterly without doubt. "Check for a full bowel. This is likely bowel distension on top of the catheter kink, a second trigger source stacked on the first." Hale stood frozen, the syringe still in his hand, watching a woman he had dismissed for 8 months move like she had commanded rooms far worse than this one. Jacob's blood pressure monitor read 190/110, then 182/104. The numbers were falling, but not fast enough, and Claire knew exactly how much time was left before falling was no longer possible. "Talk to me," she said to Jacob, her hand steady against his shoulder. "Where's the pain? Point if you can't talk." He could not talk. His jaw was locked too tight. He managed to lift one finger toward his lower abdomen. "There it is," Claire said. Bowel impaction. We need manual disimpaction now, gentle pressure only, and someone get me nitro paste for his forehead, in case the pressure doesn't drop once we relieve the source. Hale finally set the syringe down. You're certain. I am certain. Something about the way she said it left no room for the question to survive a second time. The next 4 minutes moved the way emergencies always moved for Claire, slow enough to see everything, and fast enough that there was no time to feel any of it. She worked with a calm precision that had nothing to do with nursing school, and everything to do with training she had never once mentioned to a single person in that building. Jacob's blood pressure began to drop in earnest. 160/90, 140/88. His color started to even out, the harsh red line at his collarbone fading into something closer to normal. There you go, Claire murmured, watching the monitor, her hand still on his shoulder. There you go, ghost. Breathe it down. She heard herself say it a half-second after it left her mouth, and by then it was already too late to take back. Jacob's head turned toward her, slow, his eyes finding hers for the first time since the crisis began. Nobody else in the room understood what had just happened. To them, it sounded like an offhand nickname, the kind of thing a nurse might say to lighten a tense moment. To Jacob Ryan, it was a call sign that had died with a team on a rooftop 3 years ago, spoken by a voice he had heard only once before, cutting through gunfire and dust on the worst night of his life. Say that again, he rasped. Rest your voice. You're stable, but you're not out of the woods yet. Say it again. Claire hesitated, 1/2 second too long for the moment to pass as coincidence. You're stable, she repeated instead, quieter now. Try to rest. His blood pressure monitor read 128/84. He was out of danger. He was also staring at her like the entire hospital had disappeared, and only the two of them remained in the room. Hale finally exhaled, running a hand through his hair. How did you know all of that? I read his chart. It's in there if you look for it. That's not what I asked. Claire did not answer. She checked the catheter line one more time, adjusted the monitor leads, and began writing in the chart as though nothing unusual had happened at all. It was not nothing. Everyone in that room knew it was not nothing. They simply did not yet know what it was. That afternoon, before the shift changed, the hospital director called Claire into his office to review the incident. 2 other supervisors sat along the wall, notepads open, expressions carefully neutral in the way people practice when they are not yet sure whether a conversation is a reprimand or a commendation. Walk us through your reasoning, the director said. Step by step. We need it documented properly. Claire did, in clipped, precise language that sounded nothing like the soft, hesitant voice she used on an ordinary rounds. She described the split coloring above and below the injury level, the specific blood pressure threshold that separated dangerous from catastrophic, the 2 most common trigger sources in a T6 injury, and the order in which they needed to be ruled out. One of the supervisors set down her pen halfway through and simply listened. That's an unusually specific knowledge base for general nursing training, the director said carefully when she finished. I've had additional training, Claire said. Field medicine, mostly. It doesn't always show up on a civilian resume. Nobody in the room pushed harder that afternoon. They did not need to. The truth was already sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the next question out loud. And for one more day, nobody quite was. That night, after the incident report had been filed and Hale had gone home rattled and quieter than Claire had ever seen him, she stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift, sitting in her car in the empty parking lot, hands finally shaking the way they were supposed to shake after something like that. She had sworn to herself she would never say that name out loud again. She had buried Ghost the same week she buried the version of herself that used to answer to Falcon 6, her own call sign from 11 years of Air Force combat control, 3 deployments, and 1 mission in a valley outside Kandahar that had ended with half her team wounded and one of them permanently changed. Jacob Ryan had been the SEAL element her combat control team was attached to that night. She had called in the airstrike that ended the firefight and started the nightmare, danger close, closer than doctrine allowed. Because the alternative was watching every man on that rooftop die under fire, she could have stopped 30 seconds sooner if she had made the call 30 seconds sooner. She had made the call when she made it. Jacob Ryan had lost both his legs and the use of his left hand for the rest of his life, in the blast radius of a decision she still replayed at 3 a.m. some nights, wondering if there had been a better version of that 30 seconds she had failed to find. She remembered the radio traffic from that night with a clarity that never dulled no matter how many years passed. The SEAL Element Commander's voice, tight and controlled, even as the rooftop position collapsed under fire. Ghost's voice, calling distances she used to correct the strike package. The awful half-second of silence after she gave the final coordinates, when every person on that radio net understood what danger close actually meant in practice, not in a classroom. She had made the call because the alternative was every man on that roof dying inside 2 minutes, not because it was a clean decision or an easy one. Danger close meant accepting that the same weapon saving those lives could also injure the people closest to the target, and there had been no version of that night where everyone walked away whole. She had left the Air Force 18 months later, her own body carrying scars from that same night. A blast fragment scar along her jaw she covered with foundation on the rare occasion she wore any, and rope burns across both palms from the fast rope insertion that had gone wrong before the airstrike ever went right. Nursing school had felt like the only door still open to her. Somewhere she could still save people without ever having to make the kind of call that decided who lived and who came home changed forever. She had not known, when she accepted a position at Ridgeline 8 months ago, that the man from the rooftop would already be there, 3 doors down from the supply closet, refusing every nurse who tried to help him. She had asked for his case anyway. She told herself it was penance. She was starting to understand it might have been something closer to a debt she owed him in person, whether or not he ever knew her name for it. Word of what had happened in room 214 moved through the staff break room faster than any official report ever could. By the time Claire clocked out that night, 3 different nurses had asked her, in 3 different tones of disbelief, how she had known to check a catheter line before anyone else in the room had even considered it. She gave each of them the same answer. She had read the chart carefully. It was true, as far as it went, and it was the only version of the truth she was willing to hand out for free. Dr. Hale filed his incident report at 11 that night, sitting alone in the physician's lounge with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, rewriting the same paragraph 4 times because he could not make himself write down that a nurse he had dismissed for 8 months had corrected him in front of a full care team, and been right. He finally wrote it plainly. Autonomic dysreflexia identified and managed appropriately by Nurse Donovan prior to physician intervention. Patient stabilized. He stared at the sentence for a long time before he saved the file. The next morning, Jacob Ryan asked to see her before anyone else came in. Claire stood at the foot of his bed, her posture different than it had been in 8 months. Spine straight, shoulders back, the disguise finally too heavy to keep wearing in this one room. "Say the name again," Jacob said, "or tell me I imagined it." "You didn't imagine it." "Then say it." "Ghost," Claire said, and watched his whole body go still. "That's what your team called you. I heard it over the radio for 6 months before that night." "Who are you?" "Air Force Combat Control. Technical Sergeant Claire Donovan, though that wasn't the name anyone used on the ground. My call sign was Falcon 6. Jacob's jaw worked silently for a long moment. "Falcon 6 called the strike that night." "Yes." "Falcon 6 saved 11 men on that rooftop, including me, and put me in this bed for the rest of my life in the same 30 seconds. "Yes," Claire said again, and this time her voice cracked on the word, the first crack anyone at Ridgeline had ever heard from her. Jacob looked at her for a long time, his anger from the past 8 months rearranging itself into something Claire could not immediately name. "I spent 3 years hating whoever made that call," he said finally. "I never had a face for it. I had a voice on a recording nobody would let me hear again, and 11 guys who kept telling me it was the right decision, and none of that ever made it feel like the right decision from in here." "I know," Claire said. "I've never once believed it was the right decision either. I've just never found a better one, no matter how many times I run it. I used to imagine what I'd say to you if I ever found out who you were," Jacob said. "I had whole conversations in my head. None of them were kind." "I imagined the same thing," Claire said. "None of mine were kind either." "What changed?" "I watched you fight for 8 months to walk again on legs that don't exist anymore, and I realized hating the decision doesn't undo it. It just wastes the time you have left on the other side of it." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the blanket where his left leg used to be. "I don't forgive the decision. I don't know if I ever will. I'm not asking you to. But I don't hate you for it either. Not anymore." You made the only call that kept 11 of us breathing that night, including me, even if what came after wasn't a life I would have chosen for myself. That's more than I expected, Claire said quietly. More than I thought I deserved to hear. Maybe we're both carrying more than either of us deserves, Jacob said. Doesn't mean we have to carry it alone anymore. Something in the room shifted then. Some old weight finally set down between two people who had been carrying it separately for 3 years, without either one of them knowing the other was carrying the same weight. Word moved fast in a small hospital. By that afternoon, Dr. Hale was standing in the doorway of 214, with a face that had gone through several versions of confused, before settling on something close to humbled. "Is it true," he said, "the thing people are saying, that you are Air Force Special Operations?" "Combat Control," Claire said. "Not quite the same thing, but close enough for hospital gossip." "You've been hiding that for 8 months." "I've been hiding it for longer than that, Doctor. 8 months is just how long I've hidden it from you." Hale had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I should have listened to you yesterday, before I picked up that syringe. You should have listened to the chart 4 days before yesterday. That's a conversation for another time." He nodded slowly, chastened in a way Claire had not expected and did not particularly enjoy watching. She had spent enough years around men who mistook confidence for competence to feel very little satisfaction in seeing one of them finally corrected. The real test came 3 days later, when a gas leak in the hospital's east wing triggered a partial evacuation during the height of visiting hours, and half the staff on duty had no idea how to move immobile patients through a chaotic hallway without losing anyone in the crush. Claire heard the alarm and did not hesitate this time. She did not curve her shoulders or lower her eyes. She walked into the hallway like she had walked into 100 chaotic spaces before, and she started giving orders in a voice that carried over the alarm without her ever raising it. "Wheelchairs and beds to the west stairwell, not the elevators. Ambulatory patients form a line along the wall, hands on the shoulder in front of you. Staff, count your patients out loud every 30 seconds so nobody gets left in a room." A young aide near the elevator bank started to argue that the elevators would be faster. Claire cut across her without raising her voice further, just adding enough weight to each word that the argument died before it finished forming. "Elevators lose power in a gas event. Stairwell west side now." An elderly patient in a wheelchair began to panic, hands gripping the armrests, breath coming too fast. Claire crouched beside him without breaking stride in her attention to the rest of the hallway, one hand briefly on his shoulder. "Sir, look at me. You're going to be fine. We are walking, not running, and I am not leaving this hallway until you're clear. Count your breaths with me. In for 4. He counted. His breathing slowed. She was already moving again before he finished the second count, trusting the instruction to hold on its own, the way she had once trusted radio calls to hold across a battlefield with no time to repeat them. People moved. They moved because something in her voice made arguing feel unthinkable, the same command presence that had once kept panicked soldiers moving through smoke and gunfire toward a landing zone. Dr. Hale found himself relaying her instructions to a knot of confused visitors before he even registered that he was following her lead, instead of giving his own orders. Jacob Ryan, wheeled out by an aide who had never once managed to calm him before, watched Claire clear that hallway in under 6 minutes, and understood for the first time exactly what kind of person had called that airstrike 3 years ago. When the leak was contained and the all-clear sounded, hospital administration wanted answers, and Claire gave them without flinching, her service record finally laid open on a desk instead of buried in a locked box in her closet. 11 years, Air Force Combat Control, the hospital director said, reading from the file. 2 bronze stars, a Purple Heart you never once mentioned on any employment document. It didn't seem relevant to changing bandages. It's relevant now. Nurse Donovan, how would you feel about building something here? A tactical casualty response training program, specifically for staff working polytrauma and combat veteran cases. Nobody in this building should freeze the way half of them froze today. Claire thought about Jacob Ryan, 3 years angry at a voice on a recording, finally allowed to put a face to it and choose something other than hatred. She thought about Dr. Hale, humbled but not broken, still capable of becoming a better doctor than the one who had reached for that syringe 5 days ago. "I'd like that," she said. "On one condition. Jacob Ryan consults on the curriculum. He's the only person in this building who understands what it actually feels like when the room freezes around you." Jacob, 3 doors down, agreed before anyone had even asked him. Before the program launched, there was one more test neither of them had planned for. A new patient arrived in the polytrauma wing in early spring, a young Army veteran with a fresh spinal injury, and a family in the waiting room who had no idea what autonomic dysreflexia even was, let alone how to recognize it before it became an emergency. 2 weeks into his stay, his monitor spiked in the middle of a visit from his mother, and this time it was Dr. Hale who caught it first, calling out the exact combination of symptoms Claire had taught him to watch for, checking the catheter line himself before reaching for anything else. Claire arrived 90 seconds later, to find the crisis already under control. The young veteran's blood pressure falling steadily while his mother stood frozen by the window, and Dr. Hale explaining calmly, in plain language, exactly what had happened and why. "You didn't need me this time," Claire said afterward in the hallway. "I needed you 8 months ago," Hale said. "I'm trying to make sure I don't need you every time after that." It was the closest thing to an apology he had ever managed, and Claire decided it was enough. The program launched 2 months later, small at first, a handful of staff learning the difference between panic and a physiological emergency, learning to read a spinal injury patient's body instead of guessing at his mind. Claire stood taller now. She wore her sleeves rolled, the coordinates on her forearm visible for the first time in 8 months, not a secret anymore, just a fact about a life that had led her, eventually, to a hallway where she finally stopped running from what she used to be. The curriculum grew over the following year into something larger than either of them had expected, eventually adopted by 2 other VA facilities in the region, each one built around the same core lesson Claire had learned the hard way, on a rooftop and in a hospital hallway both. The body tells the truth long before anyone is ready to listen to it, and the job of the people around a patient is to listen carefully enough to hear it in time. Jacob Ryan called her Falcon 6 sometimes, when nobody else was listening, and she let him, because the name did not carry only grief anymore. It carried the beginning of something neither of them had a clean word for yet. Dr. Hale asked her months later why she had hidden it so long in the first place. "Because I was afraid of exactly what happened," Claire told him. "That the moment people knew, they'd stop seeing the nurse and only see the soldier. I forgot that a person can be both, and that hiding half of yourself doesn't actually protect anyone. It just makes you slower when someone needs the whole of you at once." The end. This story was never really about a hospital, or a hidden military record, or even about the 6 minutes that nearly changed everything twice over. It was about the cost of hiding half of who we are, out of fear that the rest of us won't be believed, or won't be forgiven, or simply won't be understood. Claire Donovan spent 8 months making herself smaller so nobody would ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, and in doing that, she almost missed the one moment where the whole of her, not half of her, was the only thing that could save a life. Jacob Ryan spent 3 years hating a voice instead of a person, because a recording had never once let him see the fear and the certainty sitting side by side in the same decision. Neither one of them was wrong to be afraid. Fear is not the failure here. The failure would have been letting that fear decide the rest of the story. Respect isn't handed out with a title, and it isn't erased by one either. It's earned in the moment someone chooses to show up fully, scars and all, when showing up smaller would have been so much easier. If there's a version of yourself you've been hiding, out of fear that it's too much, or too complicated, or too hard to explain, this story is a reminder that the people worth keeping around are the ones who can hold both versions of you at once. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't running toward the emergency. It's finally letting the people around you see all of who you are, long before there's a crisis forcing the truth out into the open. Claire and Jacob both learned, in their own time and their own way, that survival is not the same thing as healing. Survival gets you through the first night. Healing is the slower work of choosing, again and again, to let someone else in on the parts of the story you were sure would only ever make you smaller in their eyes. It rarely works out that way. Usually, the people worth keeping close only grow closer once they finally understand the whole of what you carried alone for far too long. That was true for Claire Donovan. It was true for Jacob Ryan. It is very likely true for someone reading this right now, carrying a version of themselves they have not yet found the courage to introduce to the people standing closest to them. You do not have to carry it alone tonight, and you do not have to carry all of it at once. Sometimes it starts with one honest sentence, said out loud, to exactly one person willing to listen. Thank you for listening to this story from Emergency 911 Stories. If it moved you, tap that like button and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from tonight. Subscribe so you never miss the next story of quiet strength hiding in plain sight. See you in the next one.